Good morning and welcome to day 2 of the Connecticut 2021 Mentoring Summit. We have a wonderful day planned today for the second day, advancing social equity and youth mentoring, and a wonderful plenary. My name is Jo Hawk. My pronouns are she and her. I'm a program manager at the Governor's Prevention Partnership, and I'd like to go over a couple housekeeping comments to start out with. Today, our conversation will actually run, it says 45 minutes, but it'll be an hour and a half for the plenary. We will have a substantial part of that, which will be devoted to questions and answers. We are recording this for distribution in the future. These recordings will be available through our website. The views expressed today in this presentation are the views of the Governor's Prevention Partnership. We are doing this for educational purposes, and the Governor's Prevention Partnership is not liable for any outcomes related to the implementation of the materials presented here today. And with that brief introduction, I would like to turn the mic over to our co-president, Roland Harmon, who will introduce our speakers for today. Roland?
Well, thank you, Jo. And I want to apologize. I'm having some technical difficulties with my camera. I can't get it started. Well, we're going to go ahead. We're in the world of Zoom and the field of technology. And it's so good to see everyone this morning. We're really excited about our two presenters, Dr. Rhodes and Dr. Weiston. And so we're in the day 2 of our thought-provoking and action-oriented summit. And we want to thank everybody for an incredible start on yesterday. It was filled with wonderful stories, workshops, tools, you name it. I especially want to thank, just right at the top of the day here, I want to thank Jo. We're going to hear a little bit more from her later, but it was her vision to pull this summit together, and the 40 presenters and speakers that are possible. And also thank you to the partnerships team who's working behind the scenes, making all of these good, wonderful workshops happen. And so we're just so happy and grateful to bring together some great leaders in the field of mentoring. We're looking forward to this great day. And in just a moment, we're going to kick off our plenary with two of our extraordinary names in mentoring, Dr. Jean Rhodes and Dr. Torie Weiston-Serdan. Dr. Rhodes has devoted her career to advancing intergenerational relationships, has published many books, has done extensive research that have made significant contributions to the field of mentoring. And Dr. Weiston-Serdan is a master practitioner in mentoring, a teacher, researcher, and a developer of many, many trainings that serve for mentors that serve diverse youth populations. She also serves on the board of Big Brothers Big Sisters, LGBTQ advisory board, and she's on the research board for the National Mentoring Research Center. And so they're going to be exploring the opportunities and challenges in advancing social equity and youth mentoring. Our breakout sessions start a little later today. You'll see we've got 2 sessions this morning at 11 o'clock. And then there will be another 2 sessions at 12:15. And we'll cap the whole thing off with a look over the horizon, the future of mentoring, and recap some innovations and opportunities that we all experienced during this summit. But now I'm getting out the way here. We're all excited. Jo is going to be our moderator for the plenary. And Jo, go ahead, take it away.
Well, I'm just going to flip the slides. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Rhodes to begin her presentation.
Thanks for that introduction, Roland, and thanks to Jo and the Connecticut Partnership for pulling together this talk and this wonderful event. Today, I am going to try to compress 30 years worth of research into a 30-minute presentation. So that gives me about a minute a year. A lot of what I'll talk about today really comes from the synthesis I developed as I wrote a new book called Older and Wiser, which refers both to me and to mentoring as well. Jo, if you could just move to the next slide. Of course, I have to thank all of the graduate students, postdocs, and collaborators through the Center for Evidence-Based Mentoring, as well as the National Mentoring Partnership, who funds that center, and my other research funders over the years. A lot of the work began 15 years ago when I wrote Stand By Me, and Harvard Press approached me about a year or two ago and said, why don't you just do an update to that, which I thought would be easy, if you wouldn't mind going to the next one. And it really wasn't. I was, the result has been older and wiser, and it actually ended up taking me 3 or more years to write, because the field has so shifted in 15 years. And really looking at the evidence and taking stock of all that's happened has been really quite amazing. And so that's really what I want to share. And then I'm really excited about opening the conversation. I thought it would be easy, partly because I run this thing called the Chronicle for Evidence-Based Mentoring. If you're interested in the field and haven't subscribed, it's free, and I urge you to. I'm trying to get the right light here, so let's see. And so go ahead. So when I started to write Older and Wiser, my big question was, is our formal mentoring programs really making a difference? And one of the ways that you can determine whether or not a field is making a difference is through something called meta-analysis. And that is where you take all the studies that have been done on a particular topic. It could be for aspirin to anything. And you look at what is the effect size, or like the magnitude of impact. You're basically comparing the group that got mentors to a group that maybe was in a control group or comparison group. And so I decided to look at all the meta-analyses that had ever been conducted in the field of youth mentoring. And I want you to see what happened when I plotted it. If you'll go to the next. So here it is. In the background, very vaguely, you'll see green and peach, let's just say. And there you see a big increase in the amount of studies, the amount of academic articles, the amount of federal spending on the field of youth mentoring. But what you don't, well, if you can go back.
Sorry.
But what you don't see is a big improvement in the effect sizes, right? So these are all the meta-analyses that have been conducted in the field of youth mentoring over the past 20 years. And what you see is that we haven't, despite this huge investment, we haven't improved the overall effects of mentoring. And that was, kind of a rude awakening for me. I expected it to go up. I've been one of the people that's been churning out those articles, and it felt kind of like an existential threat that what I was doing wasn't really making a difference. But let's just think about what an effect size is. There's no easy conventions, but generally around the 0.2 area, where you can see in the left column, it's 0.2, is considered a pretty small effect. Other things like psychotherapy and other things get much stronger effects. So why are we kind of at this small area? And so let's just look further, take a deeper dive, Joe. And what you see is that not only, so there you see the kind of the benchmarks for what is considered a good, small, a medium, and a large effect. And what you see is that some of our most cherished, well-known programs are actually getting effect sizes that are much smaller than that 0.20. They're closer to 0. Big Brothers Big Sisters, and all of these programs that we know and love. And those programs, I basically said, well, what distinguishes those from some of the other ones that are getting stronger effects is that they take sort of what's called a friendship approach. And the idea is that just having a friendship, just feeling connected to somebody and building that friendship, the hypothesis is that will make the difference in, whether or not the person changes. And a lot of that, again, comes from my own theories that, you have one corrective experience and then things get better. And what we don't see is that happening here. And so what I really devoted the rest of the book to was kind of trying to understand why that was, why we're not seeing an improvement in effect sizes. And so if you'll go to the next slide, just so you know, I considered a lot of factors what might account for the relatively small effects. And perhaps the strongest factor is that we have kind of a myth about what makes mentoring effective. And we need to kind of begin to explore that myth and make sure it makes sense. So if you go to the next slide, what I argue in the book is that one of the reasons we're seeing small effects is that we have kind of systematically underestimated the level of risk, both environmental and individual, that many of the mentees who are referred to mentoring programs are experiencing. And I think part of it, and I explain this in the book, is that mentoring came of age when the field of positive youth development was just blossoming. And so we really kind of got swept into the umbrella of PYD programs, like after-school programs, when in fact, if you really look at mentoring, the parameters of it are much different. It's really more like a one-on-one, almost quasi-therapeutic relationship. And so we kind of got misplaced. And there's actually a better field for us, which is prevention science, which I'll talk about. So when I say that we kind of got swept into positive youth development, you can see this in the data that came out of the Jajora's 2018 study. It was over 2,000 kids, mentees across 30 programs. So it's really a beautiful snapshot of what mentoring in the US looked like in 2018. And in that study, the researchers asked, how much of your time with your mentee do you spend on the following activities? And what you see of all the activities that mentors are engaging with, the biggest is making time to have fun. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with making time to have fun, but that alone doesn't seem to be enough to improve effects. I think it's really important for relationship building, having these conversations, going to cultural outings, doing this, that, and the other thing, but it's not enough to kind of really address some of the risk factors that young people are facing. So if you'll go to the next slide. The other factor is that many of the young people, this is again, Roger Jajoras and Carla Herrera, Tom Keller, you probably know some of those names, this is their study. What they find is that many of the young people who are referred to mentoring program are already in positive youth development programs. They're already having fun. They're in after school, they're in sports, they're in other things. And they also, over 70% of young people going into programs like Big Brothers Big Sisters and other business as usual programs say that they already have a natural mentor and they already have a good relationship with at least one teacher. So mentoring programs are probably trying to fill a void that doesn't exist or that is not as prominent as other voids and difficulties that young people are struggling with. And in fact, we may be pulling them out of positive youth development programs to get them into these one-on-one relationships. And so we're kind of taking them out of their context and putting them in these formal relationships when in fact, they probably are getting mentoring in those PYD programs. So one of the arguments is, we've got this tremendous investment in this infrastructure we call mentoring, but we may be kind of misdirecting it. So go to the next slide. And the reason I say that is, again, many of the young people have these protective factors. They've got good relationships and so on. So if you can go to the next slide. And yet many of them are presenting. Again, this is data from the Jajora study of over 2,000 kids. Many are presenting with pretty significant emotional and contextual risk factors. So over 40% are presenting with mental health challenges. And that is double the amount of youth nationally, who, by the way, are presenting with a lot of mental health struggles. Double the rate, the kids who are referred to mentoring programs are suffering double the rate of ADHD. Far more poverty, far more extreme poverty. They're much more likely to have an incarcerated or single parent. And so what that really led me to think about is that maybe parents and families are turning to mentoring programs because of these challenges, not for positive youth development activities. So if you'll go to the next slide. And in fact, a study that Tim Cavell and Lindsay Wheeler and others have done, they found that in fact, in Big Brothers Big Sisters of Canada, the parents identified their children's disability or psychiatric illness as the primary reason that they referred them to school-based mentoring. Okay, so they're looking to mentoring programs for help with, with some sort of mental illness or a behavioral health struggle, and they're not actually getting that. And if you go to the next slide, I think you'll find this really interesting. This is a study that didn't really kind of make too big of a splash, but I found really fascinating. And let me just walk you through it. Unfortunately, the gold means white, the blue is Black parents. And what they did is they looked at when parents saw a need for a mentoring program. And what you see here is that when kids have normal range of mental health struggles, Black and white parents are equally likely to see a need for a mentoring program. But when there is elevated mental health struggles, Black families are twice as likely to see a need for a mentoring program. That finding that Black parents, even more than white parents, are turning to mentoring programs as an alternative to maybe formal mental health care, led me to do a lot of interviews as I was writing the book. And I found this trend over and over again, that Black parents saw mental health, psychologists, psychiatrists, that whole mental health world as less accessible than mentoring programs. They felt that their child would be more likely to be medicated and not treated properly, that there was going to be stigma associated with and diagnoses that would follow the child, and that they really liked the idea of turning to a mentoring program for mental health care and for emotional support. And yet, as we looked at the JAJORA data, what they were getting was fun and cultural activities and outings and things like that, which again, vital for building the relationship, but maybe not for addressing the kinds of concerns that parents were having. So if you'll go to the next slide. And so there is, in the field of prevention science, and this is from the National Academies of Science, there is this continuum that we place interventions on. And promotion might be like every kid needs, fresh air and sports and activities. And then universal is like really good for most of the population. Things like, good relationships with teachers and so forth. But then you get into other kinds of prevention, selective and indicated. And if you'll read, how they describe selective and indicated, I think you'll agree that mentoring is further along that continuum, that in some ways we've been treating mentoring like a universal program, when in fact it's more like a selective and in some cases indicated program, or it's being used that way by parents and families. So if you'll just go to the next, see it, and thank you, Joe. So that's where I would put youth mentoring, is further along. So that's why when I really tried to figure out why the effect sizes haven't changed, I think it's for this reason. I think that we have been underestimating both the risk and difficulties of the mentees, that they're double the risk of kids overall. And we have been providing them with care that, it's sort of like giving an aspirin to everybody. It might help, those with aches and pains, but for people with more severe difficulties, they may need something more than that. So if you'll go to the next slide, and I think in some ways we have perpetuated that myth. If you look at this, it says you don't need special skills to be a mentor. Excuse me, I'm going to go inside. It's raining out here. And in fact, I think that in some ways we do need to better prepare our mentors for the kind of work they're going to be doing. That in some ways you do need skills to work with young people who are struggling with mental health problems. So if you'll go to the next slide. And because we're not really equipping parents with what they need, they're in some ways, the mentors are some ways getting frustrated, because many mentors, as you know, come to programs really with a desire to help, and they've been successful in other areas of their life. And now they're in a situation where they don't really have the tools to deal with the level of struggle that many of the young people are facing. And if you'll read these quotes from Renee Spencer's article, "It's Not What I Expected," you'll see that kind of being reflected here. And so consequently, in this study, what you see is that there's like a pretty high attrition rate in many mentoring programs. This was data from 60,000 matches. And what we see is that overall, 38% of matches are ending prematurely. And that the risk of premature termination goes up in relation to how much risk the young person is facing. And so that again tells us that if you're putting mentors with young people who are facing considerable risks and they don't feel prepared, you risk higher attrition, you risk relationships falling apart because mentors feel overwhelmed and ill-prepared. And so what I would argue, and what I argue in Older and Wiser, is that our models don't quite fit mentees' needs. And that what we need to do is balance building those relationship building activities with actually providing young people with skills and goal-focused activities that could help address some of the needs that we're seeing. And this work is not unique to me. In fact, many of my colleagues like Tim Cavell and Sam McQuillan and others have been arguing this for years. And I've been the one that's holding out and say, no, it's all about the relationship. It's the relationship balanced with these goals and skills. So let me go to the next. And so this is a chapter that Tim Cavell did really like 5 years ago, where he said, we need to kind of move from thinking about the relationship as the intervention to the relationship as the context for providing targeted evidence-based intervention. And here again, I know it's a lot of data, but I think you'll capture it. On the left, you'll see what I call the friendship model, and you'll see those low effects. But when you start looking at the effect sizes of programs that are really more targeted and focused on specific skills, you see the effects going through the roof. Really, really impressive. That top one is Mike Karcher's program and many others. And I should just say, I'm a clinical psychologist. This is a trend that we have seen in our field. When I was trained way back when at the University of Chicago, the whole focus of psychotherapy was to build a relationship and then kind of dig in and figure out what was buried deep within the child or adult. And now my daughter's a clinical psychology trainee, and what she's getting is, if the child presents with this, here is the cognitive behavioral treatment that would work best for them. And as programs in mentoring begin to be developed by this younger generation of psychologists and social workers and others, we're seeing this targeting and we're seeing the effects go way up. That's great. And so that's really our blueprint if we want this intervention to be more effective. The problem is that how does a program, let's just take Big Brothers Big Sisters, although they're certainly not the only friendship model out there. How does a program like Big Brothers Big Sisters provide targeted evidence-based care when every child who walks in has a different set of issues? It's easy when you're a boutique program that specializes in certain kinds of populations. It's much harder when you're a general, I would call a non-specific program. You can't possibly expect a program to have a library of every targeted based intervention and then expect the typical uncompensated volunteer to be able to deliver it with fidelity. So that creates a problem. So if you'll go to the next slide, what we see here, this is a study that came out of my lab last year, is that to the extent that you can do that, to the extent that you can provide targeted care, again, you get much larger effects. This is a meta-analysis we did. And you see that overall, more targeted provides double the effect size. And for outcomes that many programs value, like academic, mental health, and social, triple the outcomes. So, I mean, it's not like it's hiding from us. We know how to get stronger effects. What's kind of puzzling, though, is how can you get a big programs that don't specialize, that aren't boutique programs, to provide that kind of targeted care, because it's just very difficult when you don't, a lot of the programs that showed these strong effects were incubated at universities. They had captive audiences of mentors. They were university students who were getting college credit. It's really hard to do that when you've got a large program that's completely reliant on volunteers and serving all different kinds of youth. So the question then becomes, how do you take like a boutique, that boutique model, and use it in a large thing where everyone coming in has a different issue and still have it targeted? And you'll notice I picked the store Target because that was the conundrum that I had as I was writing the book. And so I came up with kind of what I thought maybe is the road to rigor. And here's what I'll just pitch out there. And I'm trying to move as quickly as I can. Let's see, I have 5 more minutes. The road to rigor is let programs continue to do what they do best. And that is they're excellent at recruiting and screening and training volunteers, at supervising those matches, at creating this, basically this liaison with parents, but really deep trust. I mean, that's what came through when I was doing my interviews, is that parents really trust. If you've got a smaller targeted program, do exactly what you're doing. So if you're Mike Karcher and you've got a program for a particular kind of middle school student, let that continue to blossom. Train the volunteers to deliver that thing, and the mentor's role is to deliver the intervention. But for larger programs, I saw 2 paths. One is to train the mentors to support this growing array of technology-delivered interventions. And 2 is to embed mentors into pre-existing systems of care. In both of those cases, the mentor isn't delivering the intervention. They are supporting a young person's use of evidence-based tools. So if you think about, say, well, let's just think about yourself. Probably at some point in your life, you've downloaded an app that promised to help you lose weight, exercise more, sleep better, relax, whatever it is. On its own, that's not particularly consequential, but it is part of a massive movement in clinical science and beyond of taking evidence-based ideas and putting them into technology-delivered interventions that are fundamentally changing the delivery of mental health and healthcare. So let's talk about that a little bit. There's a lot of benefits. Believe me, when I stumbled onto this as a solution, a possible solution, it took like another 6 months to kind of read the literature. So I won't bore you with it, but you can kind of scan this and you can see that there are many benefits to technology-delivered interventions. However, and this is the big however, in the absence of support, less than 5% of youth reopen apps. And this was probably the case for you too. This is why I brought you into it, is that if you've downloaded that app, and I have too, I downloaded Headspace, for example, and I start out all intentions, and then by the 3rd or 4th day or week, I'm like, you know what, I got to get to work. We know this from Weight Watchers, from Alcoholics Anonymous. You have to have a sponsor if you're going to stick with any kind of self-improvement program. And that is a perfect role for a volunteer mentor, is to be that sponsor. With that kind of sponsorship, and psychologists call it supportive accountability. With supportive accountability, we can deliver evidence-based interventions that rival the effect of face-to-face interventions. I mean, read that description. We argue that human support increases adherence through accountability we can put in the word mentor, who is viewed as trustworthy, benevolent, and having expertise. That is a perfect role for an untrained volunteer, to be that support, to be that sponsor in the delivery of evidence-based care. And, as I said, when supplemented with coaching and support, technology-delivered interventions can produce outcomes that rival those of face-to-face, often at little cost and in ways that are more geographically, financially, and socially acceptable. And I say this because we have a huge gap in mental health care, and mentors can bridge that gap. We can begin to provide and deliver evidence-based care to all young people, not just privileged young people. So mentors were in need of evidence-based interventions. Evidence-based interventions were in need of mentors. The simple idea is to put those 2 things together. Okay, so the next slide. Oh, this was a presentation you may have seen yesterday that out of the Center for Evidence-Based Mentoring, we've actually partnered with the world's best mental health, education, career development apps, and created basically a platform for mentors to provide supportive accountability and to get trained in supportive accountability. And you're welcome to go. It's mentorhubapp.org, and you can join the wait list, and we'd love to work with you. It's a nonprofit. The other idea is embedded mentoring, and that is something that we've seen where mentors, rather than pluck children from their classrooms, from their after-school programs, from their environments, embed themselves in those environments and reinforce what the child is already doing. So if the child's struggling in school, there's a program in Boston that's called Boston Partners for Education. The mentor goes to the classroom, sits through the class, and then during breakout sessions reinforces. If they're in juvenile justice system and they're getting mental health care, the mentor reinforces, provides opportunities to practice what they're learning in those settings. If they're in an SEL class, the mentor can help them practice and integrate SEL into their everyday lives. And sure enough, we're doing a meta-analysis, but we are finding that in the presence of practice, all interventions grow stronger. So yes, another good use of mentors is to provide what's called behavioral rehearsal or supervised practice of skills that are already being learned across settings. So here's my 2 recommendations for formal mentoring, and we're going to talk in 2 minutes about informal. So prioritize mental health and well-being, because what we're seeing is that's what parents are looking for. And doing so, we shift mentors' role from delivering to supporting interventions and calibrate risk to the intervention. What I mean by that is formal mentoring programs, no matter how good they are, will only ever reach about 5% of young people. So if you'll go to the next slide. Oh, I don't know why I put this here, but I am actually teaching a course in therapeutic mentoring where paraprofessionals can get continuing ed unit, program staff and mentors can get continuing ed units from UMass online and a certificate in therapeutic mentoring if they want. It starts in March and it's 4 sessions. But as I said, volunteer mentors are a rare resource. It's only 1% of adults ever serve as volunteer mentors. And let me show you the data. This was from the US Census. And what we found is that the weighted proportion of mentors has not changed in like 15 years, despite all sorts of campaigns to get more people to mentor. It's only about 1% of the American population says that they are in a formal mentoring relationship, and that is not changing. So we need to kind of move from thinking about formal mentoring as the solution to thinking about how we can also bridge mentoring by getting more young people connected to informal mentors. And this is what I say are new models. So youth-initiated mentoring, where we teach young people who how to recruit the caring adults that are already in their lives. So if we think about the continuum of care, there's youth psychotherapy, then there can be this paraprofessional mentoring, and then there's informal mentoring. The unfortunate thing is that informal mentoring is not equally distributed. So we can have as an intervention teaching more marginalized kids how to recruit the natural mentors who already exist in their schools and after-school programs. And in fact, what we see is that young people left to its own devices, natural mentoring reproduces inequality, because the rich kids, the more privileged kids, are more likely to have mentors than the less privileged kids. And this is looking at data from the AdHealth data set. It's 60,000 kids over 5 waves of data, really good data. Those who live in neighborhoods with 80% poverty are far less likely to have a natural mentor. And even those who do, it's a different kind of mentoring. The blue are kids on public assistance, the orange are kids with no public assistance. We see that kids who are not on public assistance get a different kind of mentoring that's more focused on the future and are more likely to say their mentor is a role model, whereas kids who are on public assistance are getting more practical support and are more focused on managing money right now. So what we need to do is help more marginalized kids expand their social networks from just the people in their families, which is great, to people outside, to the social capital that exists in their schools, their neighborhoods, and elsewhere, to let them feel entitled and then have the skills to reach out. And we just did a meta-analysis on youth-initiated mentoring, and we find that the effects of youth-initiated mentoring, where you teach young people how to find mentors rather than just giving them the fish, we teach them to fish, is more effective than formal mentoring. It's got an effect size of 0.30. And that's it.
Thank you very much. That was very, very informative. I think that we're going to have a lot to talk about. But before we get to that discussion, I'd like to turn the mic over to Dr. Torie Weiston-Serdan. Torie?
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to talk to you all today, and a little nervous about going after Dr. Jean Rhodes, but I will try to engage. If there's a way, and I don't know if this is possible, Joe, I'm pretty relational. So if there's a way that we can just all go to squares as I talk, that would be awesome. Because I just want to see even some faces. It makes me feel like I'm engaging a little bit more. And I want to talk, I actually, as I was listening to Dr. Rhodes, I was thinking we're not very far from each other, right? I definitely use a critical race theory lens, an equity lens, et cetera. But I think we're essentially saying the same thing about how mentoring relationships tend to be ineffective and what are the different ways that we can sort of bolster them, right? Or look at alternatives to that. And so I'm going to talk about critical mentoring, but I think, what folks have been used to hearing me say about critical mentoring has definitely shifted and evolved a lot since 2017 when the book came out. And I always really start with our current context. In the book, I talk about how important context is. And I think context matters even right now, right? So I'll start with the idea that we are not having this summit in person, that we are having this summit via Zoom because of this pandemic, right? And also the ways in which it has been exacerbated by lack of government support and infrastructure and help, right? And so it has been essentially a year now, and we are still holding summits, convenings, meetings, classroom teaching and engagement via Zoom. Which has, on some level allowed us a larger reach. It's been great for some of us because people tune in different ways. On another level, it has really disrupted our concept of community and creating and curating special spaces where we can be together. And we know that mentoring is relational, and it's all about that exchange and that being together, right? And having a relationship. And so we need to see that as a very important aspect of our context, right? And not just that it's disrupted our convenings, but also the ways in which it has, I won't say exacerbated because this inequity already existed, but the ways in which it has highlighted inequity in our society, right? That we know which folks are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, not just in terms of their physical health, but in terms of their economic health, right? Again, in terms of their communal well-being. This is important context for us to consider here, that we are in this moment where we can't even connect in the ways that we need to connect, but that we're also in this moment where we really not only crave it, but there's a requirement, right? It's almost mandatory that we have some human connection in this moment, and we can't, right? On top of this, we have this twin pandemic. I know we've been calling it the twin pandemics, right? But we have this other issue of racial equity and justice. Not one that is new, again, I will highlight, but one that has become more present for us as technology highlights it, right? As we are allowed to get information across our screens in quicker ways. I always say that, BIPOC folks, Black folks, Indigenous folks, people of color, queer folks, we already knew that there was injustice in all of these ways, right? But now there is a more lively discussion about equity and justice and anti-Blackness and all of these issues, because on top of the pandemic, we had what folks are calling our racial justice summer, right? And again, I emphasize that these ideas are, these issues are not new. Before George Floyd was murdered before our very eyes. I mean, I could literally give you a list of Black and brown folks and queer folks that have been assassinated, killed, via state-sanctioned murder, right? And so that may have been the moment that sort of catalyzed a lot of folks seeing it on their screens in the way that they did. But a lot of us have been fighting for this sort, or fighting against this sort of violence for a very long time. And in fact, just a side note, I recognize, I tell folks all the time that if they were surprised by George Floyd at all, that they are ahistorical, because there is an entire history not just in the Black community, but in the queer community, the Stonewall riots, right? In the Latinx community, the Zulu riots, right? And I can list and list and list the times when state-sanctioned murder and violence has been, a plague in our society. And so if George Floyd was a surprise, we have not been paying attention to history. We haven't been taught history. We haven't been having dialogue around what's real in terms of the history of this country. And so those are just two of the pieces of context, right, that we exist in now. We have to think about this context very critically as we think about how we do our work as mentors and as youth development professionals. And for me, critical mentoring was a real response to context, right? It was about saying that as I look at the mentoring literature, I'm seeing a lot of data and sort of theories around how we connect with folks. And again, just as Dr. Rhodes put it, right? But not really seeing the effectiveness and definitely not seeing the link between mentoring and actually addressing context, right? And so for me, critical mentoring was about how do I really begin to think about how do I partner with young people? How do I, again, much like Dr. Rhodes said, how do I really become an effective elder, right, in this community? And how do I ensure that young folks have the resources that they need to thrive, right? And I recognized early on, even in my teaching career, I was a high school English teacher for 15 years. And I got in the classroom and I started talking to young people, and I recognized that what we all wanted in terms of our teacher-student exchange and the learning that we want to happen in our classroom just really wasn't possible in the context of the bureaucratic sort of system and institution that schooling was, right? And I thought it was good for lasting for 15 years, but I felt like what I knew that teaching, actual education exchange wasn't going to be allowed to happen in the classroom because it wasn't meant to happen, especially for the young folks that I really wanted to serve, right? Black, brown, poor, queer, et cetera. And so again, there was this ongoing critique of what do these systems look like? How do we fully engage them? And for me, the ultimate goal was thinking about how do I, again, sort of reaffirming, how do I ensure that young people have voice, power, and choice? How do I make sure that I'm not getting in the way of progress? Because that was another issue for me with sort of traditional mentoring models, that it felt like a lot of respectability politics, that it felt like a lot of top-down, hierarchical, I'm the adult, I know a lot, so I'm going to tell you all the things that you need to know. Not really recognizing the assets that our young folks bring to the table, not recognizing the radical critique that they were bringing to the table. I always tell the story of my first mentoring program that I put together, and we asked young folks at the end of the year, what they thought about it. And I always quote them as saying, nah, fam, like literally those two words. It was like, nope, this is not what mentoring should look like for us. And it was because a lot of what I set up the mentoring program to be was rooted in my own adultism, my own middle classness, right? Just this concept that every kid should be going to college or university, and that's what they all wanted because that's what I experienced. And young people challenged me on that and said, for one, we constantly have adults telling us to do well in school, to show up to school, to be good in class, to get good grades. We get tons of sort of academic encouragement, but very few adults are also on the flip side willing to help us navigate these school systems, and they are even less willing and able to engage conversations around the kinds of experiences we're having in school in terms of race and in terms of our race, right? Our gender, our queerness, et cetera. And so what we would do, one young person told us that we give classic adult answers. When we say, oh, I don't like that math teacher, that, they don't treat me well. We as adults, we always have the comeback of, well, you're not going to like everyone that you work with, and you're not going to always like your bosses, but you have to learn, they have power and control. So you have to learn how to adjust. And so what we were doing was really passing on the toxic ways in which we've learned to survive in a toxic system. And we were passing that on to young people and saying, well, I made it, like I survived the hazing, so you should too, right? And not recognizing that just because you had to endure that doesn't mean that the next generation should have to, right? And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't engage in conversations that might strengthen their ability to actually continue to fight these systems. And so what I saw in a lot of mentoring programs was a lack of allowing young folks to freedom dream, right? That the sort of naturally radical notions that young folks have about questioning and pushing back and saying, this isn't right, and why are we doing it this way? That, you know, a lot of us as mentors who were older and wiser, to quote Jean, would say, well, because that's not the way we do it, right? Like, this is not how we get to the next step. And as a result, we were quelling a lot of activism and quelling a lot of young change agents who saw themselves as being the ones who might push things to the next level, right? And who might shift things a little bit for the next generation. And I really wanted mentoring to be a healthier, more whole interaction for the elders and for the young folks. And just so no one will be offended by the word elders, let me just really quickly say, we're not just talking about age, right? I'm 38 years old. I still consider myself an elder. I think I'm auntie status at this point. But when I say elder, I'm talking about folks who have had a little more experience, a little more life, right? They have lived a little more life, and they are situated in a community with folks who see them as elder, right? Who see them as someone who needs to be respected and revered and listened to. And I think it's even important to shift the language, that we shouldn't be offended by terms like elder, right? That for, you know, especially when we talk about Black communities, Latinx communities, words like elder hold a sacred, those are sacred folks in our communities. And we talk about natural mentoring, right? Those are the folks who are doing the mentoring in our communities that we don't recognize because they haven't filled out a form and gone through a matching process, right? But these elders in our communities have been holding up our young people in very real ways. They've been sort of channeling the ancestors and sharing information with our youth, with the youth in our community for ages. And we have never used the word mentoring, right? Even now, as I study the mentoring experiences of Black women and girls, you know, one of our first questions is, what do you call what you're doing? Because we're not calling it mentoring, right? We're calling it sister circles. We're calling it other mothering. We're calling it a lot of things that it's not being recognized as mentoring, but what we're doing, the work that we're engaging in terms of building each other up and providing resources and supporting folks to be able to thrive despite the conditions, the context that they exist in, the white supremacist context that they exist in, the constant trauma that is happening to Black and brown folks and queer folks in this country. Despite all of that, these folks are doing the very real work of lifting up young people and supporting them in ways that may not make sense scientifically, right? Speaking life into young folks in ways that we may not have an official term to sort of capture that, right? But being able to build young people up, being able to sort of speak to their spirits, right? Being able to say, this is a space, a specially curated space for you to freedom dream and imagine a new world for yourselves and also for us, right? Because as I talk to young folks, I get more and more woke. I start to, I challenge my own concepts of adultism, right? And this is work that I feel like I've sort of dedicated my life to, and young folks are still checking me. They are still correcting me. They are still fixing me and teaching me about the things I need to know. I actually have one protege in particular who has really just, everything that I say that I stand for, she has challenged all of it, right? And really pushed me to create more liberatory mentoring spaces, right? And I think when we really look forward to and think about like what's in our future, especially in this context that we're in, and I didn't even talk about the January 6th Capitol riots. I think partially because the collective trauma that all of us, but I think, again, especially BIPOC communities experience on that day is still hard for me to process and unpack. But that context, again, when I think about what role I want to play or need to play as mentor, as elder in this space, I think about young people having opportunities to be fully themselves. I think about young people having spaces where they feel completely safe. I think about young people having a home place on some level in their community. That means they don't only get access to one mentor. You know, one of our processes at the Youth Mentoring Action Network has been, let's create a community of elders or a community of mentors, because I think it's also a very sort of white middle class concept. One-to-one is also a very white middle class concept, right? Folks of color have never really done things one-to-one. We are collectivist folks, right? We do things in community. Not one adult has ever been responsible for raising a child. That's where we get the African proverb of it takes a village, right? I was raised by my mother, my grandmother, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, and all the folks in my neighborhood who knew us well enough to have something to say about what I was doing as I was growing up, right? And so I think we need to really shift to think more about how we can create communities of mentors, communities of elders, that not one person is responsible for sort of shouldering the burden of raising a child or being a role model for them, but that we need to think more intentionally and explicitly about, again, to Dr. Rhodes' points, how do we get folks who may not ever really see themselves as mentor, or who may not ever sign up for a formal mentoring program, how do we provide them with the skills that they need to just be able to be a solid support for young people? And again, most importantly for me, it's about how do we not get in the way as adults and as elders of change, right? How do we not get in the way of young folks' ability to radically shift our society into freedom dream? How do we keep our adultism from sort of stepping on young people's plans as they move us forward in this country and in the world? If we didn't notice anything over the summer, and I was actually tired of having these conversations with adults who would say things like, I didn't know young people were so involved. And I was like, where have you, again, ahistorical, where have you been? Young people have always been at the forefront of our movements. They always have been. And they showed us again this summer that they were willing to deal with the pandemic. And when we talk about the pandemic and we talk about surges, young folks marched in those streets all summer, and we didn't have a surge in the pandemic. Everyone was worried about the protests causing all of this, all of this uptick. We didn't have uptick of COVID-19 as a result of the Freedom Summer. We had it from going to Thanksgiving dinners and doing a lot of the foolish things that we want to do. But young people not only taught us that we could fight and be safe, right? They just sort of they shifted our whole thinking about how we do this work. They were on the streets and they were demanding change because they're tired of us not doing the work, because they're tired of us being easily pacified, because they're tired of us and our concepts of incremental change. And it's not a disrespect to us as elders, right? Or as folks who have gone before. I know that we've done our work. Angela Davis says that young folks should be able to see further because they are standing on our shoulders, right? So they definitely are being lifted by us. At the same time, they recognize that there are limitations in terms of the work that we've already done, and they're ready to push us forward. And we shouldn't be in the way. We should be at their sides. We should be behind them. We should be supporting them. For me, when I'm thinking about mentoring, especially again for BIPOC communities, I'm thinking about my role as an elder in terms of supporting a young person's ability to freedom dream and resourcing as much as I can the fight that they have in them, because they are creating a better world for all of us. We benefit when those young folks march and when they push and they change legislation and when they say divest and put the money back into the communities. We benefit, right? And for us, sometimes we get afraid because we have lived in this world for a little longer, and we've seen how things ebb and flow, and we've kind of, experienced the failures and we've experienced the blowback, and we think, slow down, calm down, be careful. We kind of do all of those things, and those are natural sort of loving things for us to do. But when we think again about mentoring, really shifting this idea around, for us, it's and for me in particular, it's about how do I create the best possible space for a young person to be able to have that freedom dream, and how do I support them and resource them as they move forward and as they do the work of changing the world, right? Because I might not be the person who gets to do that, but as Angela Davis said, they're standing on my shoulders. So how can I make sure that my back and my shoulders are strong enough to hold these young folks up, right? And for me, that's a very radical shift in our ideas of mentoring. We're not passing things down, top down, and sort of dictating with to young people. But what we're doing is curating spaces where young people feel heard, where they have voice, power, and choice, as I like to say, because then that agency that we sort of build in them at a young age translates into a freer world, right? Because they're able to think critically, navigate systems, challenge systems, right? Instead of being told, imagine as adults, if instead of being told your whole life that things wouldn't change and that you don't have any power, what if you were told the opposite of that your entire life, right? That everything has the possibility of changing and that you have immeasurable power, right? And then you were taught how to use that. You were intentionally taught by your teachers and your mentors and your family how to channel that power to be the change that you want to see in the world, right? For me, that is the radical shift around mentoring. That is, and I don't even like the word social justice. It's great, but for me, it's too soft, right? That's sort of the liberatory approach to mentoring, where we speak life into young people. And a lot of that has to start with, and this is where a lot of folks kind of don't want to agree with me, but it has to start with us doing our own work. We can't show up for young people in the ways they need us to show up if we don't critically interrogate context, if we don't understand what's happening in the world, if we're not able to be able to situate ourselves in a way that allows us to take our demands really from young folks. Like, young folks should be the bosses on some level, right? We've lived a life on some level at this point, and we need to allow them the opportunities to dream, but also to fail, right? That's the other thing that I think is important in terms of creating a safe space in mentoring relationships. And when I think of them in the ways that I've talked to you about today, it's about thinking about giving young folks opportunities to also fail where they have a community of support and folks who love them. I always tell the young folks in our organization, fail now, right? While you have us, so that we can help you, right? And we can teach you, and we can say, like, maybe think about it this way, or have you considered this, or, what are some other resources that you may have needed to make that happen, right? So that it's a safer place for them to fail. When they go out into the world, they'll be stronger, they'll be older and wiser for it, right? And I think that these are important things for us to consider in this time, that we cannot sort of leave mentoring to chance in the ways that we had before. We cannot think about these sort of top-down, one-to-one hierarchical models. We definitely can't afford, as our demographics shift, right, to think about mentoring in the sort of white middle-class ways that we always have. We have to think about how do we speak the language that young people speak? How do we allow them to freedom dream? And freedom dream has been a key term for us in our organization and our work. We don't want to quell young folks' imagination, their radical imagination. We want them to be able to imagine and dream of a freer, better world. And though that might sound radical to us in a lot of ways, we want young folks to do that because, and one of the examples I always give is, 20 years ago, if a young person had mentioned to me, even as I was a high school teacher, that they were going to make the internet their jobs, right? Like, a lot of us would have said, what are you, that's crazy. You better go into STEM, right? Like, you better figure out like a track that's going to make sense and that's going to turn into real jobs. And these young people have created social media platforms that are our entire lives now, right? Because of, on some level, because of their ability to freedom dream, because of their ability to imagine what's not possible, or what we say isn't possible. So us shifting our ideas around how we show up as elders, how we show up as adults, what mentoring actually looks like. And to that end, for me, because I'm an activist, and to that end, how do we make sure that young folks can do the change agent work, right? The game-changing work that they need to do for them, most importantly, but also for us, because again, historically, we benefit from having young folks be on the front lines and shift things and move things and make things better. So for me, our call to action is to just think critically and to rethink and to reframe and reimagine all of those sort of terms. What mentoring should look like, how we engage mentoring, how we engage in mentoring processes, and very specifically, what it looks like for BIPOC communities in relationship to justice, to equity, to freedom, to liberation, and thinking about all of the ways we can make them free before they ever really get into the wider world. All of the ways that our youth development spaces, our classroom spaces, our mentoring spaces can ensure that young folks really sort of have a taste of freedom and liberation, so that so that the world outside also on some level looks alien to them, and that they feel an immediate need to want to create change, right? When they get into the outside world. That's the work for me. My job is to be an elder who provides as much wisdom as possible, who doesn't get in the way of young people as they are doing their work, who supports them and shows up and helps them to not just survive, but to thrive, right? And again, to radically imagine a better future for all of us. And I always end by saying, young people deserve the best of us so that they can be better than us. Thank you for the opportunity to talk, and I'm excited to be in conversation with Dr. Rhodes.
Wow, that's really powerful. Thank you, Torie. I think we've heard a lot this morning. We've heard about the inspiration and the craft of mentoring. And I'm really looking forward to kind of, again, it was meant to begin as a dialogue between Drs. Rhodes and Weiston-Serdan. So I'm going to ask you, Dr. Rhodes, can you respond? What's your thought after hearing this inspirational conversation?
Well, I'll start by saying that I'm intimidated. If you thought you were intimidated, I mean, that was just remarkable and so true and so brave. I mean, these are messages we need to hear and we're not hearing. And I love this concept of elders at any age, even at 38. I think that it really leads us to, from a perspective that kind of like I was sort of focusing on a pathology perspective. And I think it's where I'm coming from. I'm coming as a clinical psychologist, and I see formal mentoring as a way to extend professional treatment and care. But I also see a part where our views really converge. And I think in some ways they converge around this notion that really formal mentoring is just one piece of it. And it's the natural mentoring where we're going to see so much action. It's the natural elders in our places of worship, in our schools, in our communities, that really it's a call to action of those natural mentors. And so I don't see our messages at all in contradiction. I see them as really building on each other in a way, because I think, you know, when Dr. Weiston-Serdan said, you know, formal mentoring is not really working as well as it could, that's exactly my message. But then the pivot to, but there's so much more that we can be doing, and we can be harnessing the power of formal relationships, but we can also be expanding the reach of informal relationships.
Yeah, and I agree. Again, I don't see our our sort of ideas is that different either, right? So I think we're essentially saying the same things in sort of in two different ways. And to be honest, Dr. Rhodes, as well, I like your emphasis on clinical psychology is particularly important as well, because again, as we work with BIPOC communities specifically that have dealt with so much generational trauma, collective trauma, individual trauma, it is really important. We've been thinking so much more about health and wellness and about the mental health supports and all of these things and ways that we can sort of naturally integrate into our spaces culturally relevant ways for young folks to be able to process what they're grappling with, right? And that's important for us, as well. So for me, you maybe, yes, in a more scientific way, you described it, right? But the idea is the same, that these young folks get the support that they need for the things that they're dealing with.
So
And for some, it might be that what they need is educational support, and for others, it might be that they need mental health care support. And the fact that particularly Black families trust mentoring is something we need to be listening to and serving better, to not hear that message and to continue to do what we're doing, which is not particularly effective in most cases, is really a disservice and a lost opportunity.
So I wonder, when you say that, why is it that you think that Black families feel that way about mentoring, as opposed to, what's the underlying cause there? What is it, something to do with the mentors that their youth are matched with? And if so, how do we make sure that those mentors and mentors that may be culturally different from them have the skill set that they need in order to work with them? And before you answer, I want to tell the audience that if there's a chat, and you can put your questions in there and we will bring them forward. So, any response?
Oh, I thought Dr. Rhodes was going to.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll just, when it comes to formal, there's two answers I would give. When it comes to formal mentoring, I think what we're hearing is that Black families are trusting it. They're turning to formal mentoring programs like Big Brothers Big Sisters, even though there's a huge mismatch. Most mentors are not Black, even though most of the kids that are served are. And that is a legacy of all sorts of things. But the typical volunteer mentor looks like me. It's a middle-aged white woman. And the typical mentee does not. And so we need to kind of acknowledge that, but also acknowledge that despite that, Black families are turning to programs like Big Brothers Big Sisters. They have instilled trust over the past 100 years. And so if we can leverage that trust, and we can leverage all of the caring adults who are willing to step up during these busy times and say, I'll give an hour a week to somebody I don't even know. I see beauty in that. I just feel like we're missing that opportunity to really bring together these different really motivations. We're marketing it wrong to the adults and to the young people. And Torie, how would you respond to that?
Yeah, I agree, especially on the marketing point. That's been a critique of mine for a long time. But I think there are two reasons. One is what I mentioned earlier about our sense of collectivism. It's already sort of embedded in the way that we do things that, our parents don't have to be the sole guides, right? We already have a sense, a collective notion that other folks should be involved in the rearing of our children, right? On some level. And that's extended family, community, et cetera. So that's already sort of in us. I think the other element too, though, and why I think we turn specifically to programs like Big Brothers Big Sisters is because I think Black families recognize a need for social capital, that they recognize that there's something in these sort of more mainstream programs that is going to be explicitly taught that will help our young folks to navigate white spaces, to be completely honest, right? I know for my mom, that was a concern, that there's a lot of love and support and everything that we can teach you, but there's something that these white spaces are also going to teach you that will help keep you safe, and that will help you be successful in their world, right? So I think that Black families recognize that, and they turn to mentoring programs to help. How I feel about that is, sort of mixed. I understand that we need that as a survival tool. At the same time, I think that we could definitely get it in our communities. I think we have been sort of taught along the way that, our communities are not enough for some reason. And so then we end up kind of looking for other ways to supplement.
Interesting, very interesting. I'm going to turn to one of the questions that are in the chat. How do you shift from one-on-one mentoring in a school to a group village mentoring? And how do we train our volunteers to also be able to support with mental health when perhaps our mentor coordinators may not even have the experience or training to do so? Ooh, that's a tough question.
I'll pass that one to you, Torie.
That is a tough question. So, I have a couple of things to say. Some things folks may not like. One, mentoring in schools can be problematic. I know so many of us do school-based mentoring work, and I respect that work, and there's nothing wrong with that work, but I do see some challenges and mentoring as being, for me at least, a more community-based model working inside of schools. And one of the reasons I think that that's a problem is because having been a teacher for 15 years, I recognize that schools are sites of trauma for so many of our young folks. And so, creating these services that become extensions of schools can be sometimes problematic. At the same time, I think if you have the right folks in place, that you can create some safe spaces on physical school campuses. But, I like to suggest that as much as you can sort of get away from school processes, the better, right? So that's one thing I want to say. The other is, I think, when you do your training for your mentors, we need to move away from this idea that one mentor is responsible for one person, right? And train them in a way that they see themselves as one in a community, right? So we may have sort of a caseload, quote unquote. I don't even really like using that term, but I may have sort of 2 or 3 proteges that directly sort of report to me, but those are just the folks that I'm checking on a regular basis. Like, we've built a solid relationship, but they know that there are 10 other mentors, in our community space that they could access. And I train the other mentors to think about themselves in this way too. So to say, you're not expected to have to answer every question or be everything for every protege, right? So if you know that there's another mentor in our community that could support a protege in a certain way, this is why we're a community. You make the introduction, you say, hey, like, I'm not an Olympic athlete, but our other mentor, Rocky, is. And so if you're interested in that, maybe you want to connect with them, right? And it doesn't mean that you're losing your relationship with me or that I'm going to support you less. It just means that, I understand that there's one need that I might not be able to fulfill, right? And so you should be able to tap into your entire community of elders to get all the resources and support you need. So I think on our end, when we set these things up, we train our mentors first and foremost to see themselves as one in a community and to work together in that way. And then, we also then have our young people see it the same way, that you might be sort of matched with this particular mentor, but all of us are accessible to you, right? And we kind of build in, program events that bring us all together, mentors and proteges all together, so that it's not just one-to-one all the time, so that we can have a more open sort of communal exchange and get to know one another as a community. I think those are definitely some of the ways that you can do that. The other question too about mental health, I think that there's some super basic level things, right? Like, I don't think we should get too technical in trying to make folks who, don't necessarily have the training be mental health coordinators. But I think, like, all of our staff and all of our mentors get, first aid, mental health first aid training, like really basic things, right? Just to sort of be able to see and notice. But we've also been very intentional in our organization about having funds put aside to engage local LMFTs and folks who are professionals who reflect our community, right? So we have definitely been intentional about hiring Black, Latinx, queer LMFTs who can be like sort of on the ready to serve when our young people need them. That's one of the things our young people actually suggested 2 years ago. They have been alongside us building a wellness collaborative. So we've been trying to create community level access to services like healthy foods. We partner with a community garden to provide that. We've partnered with, Black and Latinx and queer LMFTs in our communities who have said that, yes, we'll provide, community level access to therapeutic services. We'll come in and do workshops and things like that. We've partnered with a local boxing gym called the Self-Care Lab, where we can give young folks access to physical well-being. So our young people said to us 2 years ago, like, we need services, and the bureaucracy is keeping us from accessing services. As a nonprofit, what can you do, right? So we've been working with our young people to sort of source that out in our community and make sure that they have those services, because we do not have the expertise, and we know we don't. So we're partnering with other folks who do.
And I'll just add a few things too that really reflect exactly what you're saying. And one is that we really need to empower young people to recruit mentors. It's one thing to say all these people are available, reach out if you need them. There are particular skills that we're finding that middle class kids kind of pick up along the way, but more marginalized kids. And I see this, I've been teaching at a minority serving university for 20 years. I have office hours, nobody comes to them. There's just like this way in which there's not this sense of entitlement, and just breaking that down and saying, here's what mentors can do for you, and here's how to reach out, and don't worry about rejection. Here's how you handle it. And here's other people that can help you. So that's one thing that I think could be really valuable, is for us to really embrace youth-initiated mentoring, maybe not always as an alternative to formal, but as a bridge from a formal program to the real world. This idea of, it's Noel Hurd has talked about network engaged mentoring, that when you're mentoring, you're also looking around and saying, oh, well, this coach seems to matter a lot to you, or this teacher, let's talk about how you might reach out to them. And this notion that really we can reinforce, these experts. So, Torie talked about how, she's got all these experts on hand that she can call. But one thing that a mentor can do is say, what are you learning with this expert? Let's practice it. Let's apply it to your real life. Let's role model it. Because so often we teach skills as if they get locked in after one session, and yet a young person needs to integrate new skills and practice them and personalize them. And that's a wonderful role for a mentor who doesn't necessarily have to have all the expertise, but can reinforce what the young person is learning from the experts.
Yeah, and I would add that Torie, when you were speaking, I'm sorry to call you Torie, Dr. Weston, when you were speaking and you were talking about the other mentors in your group, what was coming to my mind is that idea of it's a safe place to practice those skills, that young people need that. So yeah, that's really wonderful. Another question is, how do we reach BIPOC youth who have differing needs, especially those who have brushes with the juvenile justice system? Either one of you.
I'll turn that over to you.
So that's, again, a good question. I think when the question, how do we reach, is sort of difficult, right? Because we know in mentoring that really most of the times they reach us. That's really most of how, that's a lot of how it happens. I think that we have to really think more innovatively, again, about what mentoring looks like and who's a mentor, and really be out in the community in ways that maybe we haven't before. And I'm making I'm making broad strokes about mentoring programs in a lot of ways, but the things that I've noticed as I've worked with mentoring programs is this kind of like, here we are, okay, everybody come for mentoring, right? Like on some level there's outreach, definitely, we put booths up and we do, recruiting in some ways, but there isn't this like real being embedded in community in ways that like a lot of folks, a lot of the hard to reach populations need us to be. Are we showing up in spaces where they are, right? And are we making ourselves sort of available to them in the ways that make sense? And I think that goes back to what Dr. Rhodes was saying too about our marketing, right? Like the way we even tend to market mentoring just says to some folks, like, that's not something I want to engage in. And so there's a bunch of folks that are not going to even show up because of the way that we show, what sort of illustrate what mentoring looks like.
Can I just add? Oh, I'm sorry.
Sure, no, go
I would
for
just
it.
add to that, young people are in these systems. They're in juvenile justice systems. They're in the foster care systems. They're in all mental health care systems. And that's where mentors need to go, rather than wait for them to get referred over. If I was placed in a juvenile justice system, I could say, okay, so what are you doing? How can I help? Let's reinforce that. Let's make it work. And building on what that young person needs at that moment, rather than having them come to this disconnected intervention and, going on outings with them, embedding in the systems of care where they are already operating is a great solution to the low effect sizes that we're seeing.
Absolutely. She said it very well. And I think, and again, I think the only thing I would add is just thinking about who's the mentor as well. And considering that, the folks that we recruit as mentors should also be a reflection of the folks that we want to serve. That only makes sense. And so we kind of also have to stop our deficit perspectives of who can be a good mentor, and really think about diversifying the mentoring pool.
And I'll add to what you just said, which is that one way to diversify it is to let the young people recruit their own mentors. And when they do, it's 80% of them recruit a mentor who looks like them. And then we can take our best practices. This is what the National Guard has been doing for decades. They have these are high school dropouts who are unemployed. And so you would think, oh, well, they can't recruit a mentor. No, the National Guard helps them pick out this mentor and approach them, and then trains them in best practice. And all of a sudden, the burden is off of the program to find mentors that look like the young person. It's to really strengthen that volunteer workforce that's already been identified by the young people.
And as you're talking, one of the things that come to my mind, and the training issue kind of ticked the thought in my mind, is I can't ignore what's happening in our country in terms of all of these things. I know that with the youth that are in many mentoring programs, there are high prevalence rates of trauma, and not one trauma, multiple traumas. And now they are, well, it's in our forefront. It's right there constantly, what do we need to do in mentoring generally for mentees and for mentors and for staff to help them through these difficult times? Either one of you can both look at me quietly.
Well, I think the first thing, and it's not just for mentoring staff or anyone, but to prevent exposure to trauma. And, I think that, Dr. Wesson has really dealt with that. I mean, we have to reduce the exposure. It is out of control. But that's primary prevention. Now, secondary prevention, there is a lot of, very good intervention programs that really help attenuate anxiety. When young people can't regulate their behavior and can't regulate their emotions, they can't learn. And there are skills that they can learn to help calm themselves down. And those can be delivered through technology. They can be delivered through cognitive behavioral interventions. But we can't just say, oh, just having this good relationship is going to help them. Trauma-informed care is a science, and we can harness that through these other mechanisms.
Torie?
Agreed.
Agreed?
Yeah, both points. And I think for me, of course, the activist side of me wants to, as much as we can, keep young folks from being exposed to the trauma in the first place, right? And that's why, for me, the bigger sort of aspiration for mentoring and community is to say, we've really got to shift things here. Like, we can't continue to be okay with the level of toxicity that we're all being exposed to, right? So that's definitely an issue. I think, again, just sort of reaffirming these ideas about health and wellness. Like, you know, again, our young folks took us to task and said, like, we just need more opportunities for rest and more opportunities to, you know, and this is another reason why we started partnering with LMFTs and other folks, because they said we need to be taught, explicitly taught, you know, tools that we can use to help us de-stress, to, you know, help us become aware of when we're being anxious and how to manage that, right? To, you know, we need some of these professional level services that can help us. And then again, for us, it was doubled in BIPOC communities, because it was like, we need these services, but we also kind of want to feel comfortable, right? So for us, we had to like really be intentional about finding those professionals who reflect our young people, so that they, we're working with a lot of Black women and girls now. And so we found Black women who are LMFTs, and, you know, and they have just, there's a different vibe when they're engaging, you know, in discussion and having conversations that make sense only to Black girls about our hair and, you know, just different things like that, that other folks don't necessarily recognize or issues. Right?
And building on that, I mean, there's all this evidence that like something like Headspace really helps.
Yep.
However, what we are finding and what I'm hearing is that it really doesn't work with Black communities. There's just a sense in which the message, the way it's messaged, isn't working. And now we're seeing these wonderful, culturally appropriate meditation and wellness programs emerging. I mean, we have to recognize that not all interventions work the same way for the same populations, and we need to be always looking for ones that are the best fit.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And can play an important role. Yeah.
Sorry about that.
I want to get to a couple more questions that might here. Just give me a second. One question is embedding mentoring right now. The embedded approach is a challenge because of COVID. How can we address that? How can we address that right now?
Well, I mean, what mental health centers and other centers have done is they've taken care online. And so, you know, we just move online for now. It doesn't mean we can't continue to do the work we're doing. So I think that we've over the past year have adapted to it. And I know there are issues with accessibility to broadband, but there's actually a Pew study that shows that actually more marginalized communities, the young people spend just as much time with their smartphones and if not more. And so I think it is a good way to reach young people right now. But I'm sure there's other answers.
Yeah.
No, I agree with that, you know, we adapt. I think also the message from our young folks has been do less right now. Like, we don't need to be sort of over programming in this moment, because, you know, many of our young folks are already doing 6 hours a day on Zoom for school anyway. And that's way too much. I have a whole critique of how schools have just shifted online with like no thoughtfulness around, you know, how to do it. So I think, you know, the message we've been hearing from young people is that, we still want to be connected. We still want to be involved, but do less, because we're already on Zoom 6 hours a day. And then we don't want to be on Zoom with you for another hour, a couple hours. And so be just really thoughtful and intentional about the programming that's happening right now.
Okay. I'm going to read another question. I'm going to read it as it's written. Okay. Given the struggles of getting funding for mentoring programs, how do we work towards a criteria for less data-driven natural mentoring that would bring more funding to programs in need?
I'm sorry. If I understand the question, it's sort of, how do we get funding agencies to value natural mentoring, even though there may not be as much data to support it? I would first counter by saying there's a lot of data to support the value of natural mentoring. You know, my lab, if you want to look, Noel Hurd's lab, Mark Zimmerman's, many studies have been done that have shown the value of, you know, social networks, of social capital. You know, there's a study that shows that if you had a mentor in your teen years, 30 years later, you have a higher quality of life, controlling for everything. If you had a coach, an athletic coach who was your mentor in high school, 20 years later, you're doing better financially. I mean, there's just an amazing amount of data. Plus this new study that we just did on natural mentors and their effectiveness. But you're right. Funding agencies don't recognize it. We always default to formal mentoring programs as, you know, what we imagine when we think of mentoring. And so part of it is getting the word out and getting the culture to shift from always defaulting to the one-on-one hierarchical relationship to these newer models. I actually have to leave at 10:30. So
yeah,
I'm going to
is
turn it
10.
over.
So Torie, if you want to quickly say something, and then we can, or just you want to wave?
Yeah, I was waving at Dr. Rhodes because I thought she was going to have to hop off. But, so
Because
no.
the session does end at 10:30, so I wanted to just give you a chance to have your comment. And
So I would just say she said it all. I think I've been excited. This has been an amazing and robust conversation. I've been happy to be in community with you all. And thank you again, Dr. Rhodes, for the
Me
conversation.
too. I feel like we could continue this conversation for hours and I wouldn't be bored.
definitely. And I looked down and saw it was 10:30 and I thought, oh my God, we're just at the beginning. It's been a wonderful conversation, two fantastic, very diverse. It shows the field, it shows the inspiration, it shows the data, it shows where we're at. Thank you so much for leading this conversation and this dialogue.
And thank
have
you
a
so
great
much.
day. All right. And with that, everyone, I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget that we have some wonderful things going on this afternoon. We have a couple breakout sessions at 11 and at, I should share my screen so that I can show it to you. Just a second. We have breakout sessions on mentoring systems involved youth. We have one on problem solving frameworks for quality improvement. We have at 12:15, we have two wonderful presentations, one on harnessing the power of everyday mentoring and the other on training vets to be mentors. These are fantastic breakouts that really just take the conversation we just had and keep going. And then at 1 o'clock, we're going to have some closing remarks about the summit. Definitely worth coming into. We look forward to seeing you on Zoom. Okay, take care. Have a great afternoon.